Chapter 17. Heard him say, George Bush doesn't care about black people. I hate the way they portray us in the media. You see a black family, it says they're looting. You see a white family, it says they're looking for food. And it's been 5 days waiting for federal help because most of the people are black. And even for me to complain about it, I would be a hypocrite because I've tried to turn away from the TV because it's too hard to watch. I've even been shopping before I've even given a donation. So now I'm calling my business manager right now to see what is the biggest amount I can give. And just to imagine if I was down there, and those are my people down there. So anybody out there that wants to do anything that we can help, that we can to help with the way America is set up to help the poor, the black people, the less well off, as slow as possible. I mean, the Red Cross is doing everything they can. We already realize a lot of people that can help are at war right now, fighting another way. And they've given them permission to go down and shoot us. George Bush doesn't care about black people. Kanye West, NBC Hurricane Relief Telethon, September 2nd, 2005. The last line was all that people focused on. It was the shock heard around the world. I was in New York City at the Dream Hotel relaxing. I had been doing some Kanye West business in New York, and I didn't actually watch the telethon. I didn't hear the statement Kanye made live, but later that day, all week in fact, I heard it over and over and over again as the news media and had a field day. My phone rang minutes after Kanye said what he said. It rang off the hook. The first phone call came from one of my dearest friends, Bill Johnson. It was ironic that he would be the first to call because he was my Negro history teacher in high school. I'd been taught from birth, it seems, to be proud of who I am, proud to be black. Bill Johnson was one who confirmed and continued those lessons. His class gave me a strong sense of myself, my culture, and my history, and helped me shape my views on race and ethnicity. Where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is in an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe. Frederick Douglass, 1866. What a fitting passage. How ironic also that Bill had taught it in our Negro history class. Now, here he was, the first one to dial my number minutes after Kanye announced to the nation his feelings about George Bush. Did you hear what Kanye just said? Was the first thing out of Bill's mouth. I told him I had not heard. Turn on the TV, he said. I grabbed the remote control and turned on the television. The news was starting to flood in. You better beware, he said. Get ready for a slew of phone calls. After he told me exactly what Kanye said, my mind started turning. Kanye was right, I thought. George Bush doesn't care about black people. Hurricane Katrina exposed that truth, and Kanye simply stated it. As Bill and I talked, everything started sinking in. I began to realize what an enormous impact those 7 words were having on the entire country, and I wondered what impact Kanye's saying them might have on him personally and professionally. I didn't let fear set in, though. I couldn't afford to. But it was not just an ordinary morning for me. Not at all. Had he really said it? I thought to myself. And then I thought, what next? Bill and I hung up the phone, and he said he'd be available if I needed him. I guess he knew things would start to sink in and perhaps be a little unsettling. He was right. Concern deepened. Jahan, my best friend in Chicago, called and began talking about what had happened to the great diva Eartha Kitt for speaking her mind. Miss Kitt had been a huge star, selling many records, topping the charts, selling out shows. In 1968, President Lyndon Johnson and his wife, Lady Bird, invited her to a celebrity women's luncheon at the White House. The president asked Eartha Kitt to give her views on inner city youth. I guess he thought that as the only black invited, she would have some insight. Instead of talking about inner city youth, though, she took the opportunity to talk about the Vietnam War and how devastating it was to poor minorities. She told the truth, but that truth embarrassed Lyndon Johnson and made him so angry that allegedly he had Eartha Kitt blacklisted. Apparently, people refused to hire her to perform, afraid of negative backlash. She was put under a secret federal investigation. Her house was bugged and Secret Service agents followed her. Some say when the FBI failed to find any evidence that Eartha Kitt was a threat to national security, they sicked the CIA on her and put together a dossier defaming her character, saying she was a nymphomaniac. It seems that Eartha Kitt, someone who I admire and respect, was basically run out of America for speaking her mind and telling the truth. That's the history of this government, defaming and destroying those who have the audacity to challenge it. Fortunately, she came back bigger than ever and is considered an icon today. But some people never come back. Jahan wasn't afraid for Kanye. Like me, she was just somewhat concerned. She has seen him land on his feet before and felt that at the end of the day, it would be no different this time. He had told the truth. And like we say in my family, it needed to be said. The calls continued to come in. They came from people I knew well and from people I hardly knew at all. All of them were positive and supportive, however. Not one person was disappointed that Kanye had made the statement. I did think, however, that some may have likened those 7 words to another seven, the last seven uttered by Christ. My former dean, Rachel Lindsay, called. She knew of Kanye's affinity for speaking his mind from his days in Chicago State. My trusted friend and fellow professor Haki Madhu Madhubuti called. He'd known Kanye since he was 5 years old. Studying Swahili at the African Center School, Haki and his wife, Safisha, owned. Both Rachel and Haki were always supportive. Haki and I even talked about getting ready and being prepared for a backlash. By this time, I had started to think more realistically about the possibilities. I became a little more anxious. I think the Eartha Kitt story and the Dixie Chicks experience another friend had reminded me of started to weigh a little more heavily on my mind than they should have. Not because they weren't real life examples of what speaking out can bring, but because my faith is unshakable. And I knew Kanye had been used as a vessel for those words to come through. My father always taught us if God is for you, who can be against you? I think about his words a lot, especially when I know Kanye has said something God would have him say. Haki and I began to talk about the whole situation. He told me not to worry, that what Kanye said was true, and a lot of people knew it, but were afraid to say so. He applauded Kanye for stepping out of a comfort zone in a way that none of the other entertainers had. He talked about how conscious Kanye was and how he would be protected. As we spoke, he was mentally putting in place the army of supporters we would call on if we needed to. If I knew anything, I knew neither Kanye nor I would be alone. Haki has always been that kind of friend to me, and I have always loved him for his consciousness and his commitment to the liberation of Black people. Even if he had not called, I would still know I could count on his support. I have many friends like Haki, Bart McSwine, Leroy Bryant, and Salim Muwakel, and that doesn't begin to exhaust the list. I know they'd have Kanye's back not because he is my son, but because they are warriors who understand that we must stand up and speak out and act on what we feel is important or we will perish. After a number of such calls, I finally got one from Kanye. "What's up, Mom?" he said. Of course, only one thing was on my mind. "Kanye, I heard you said that the president doesn't care about Black people," I said. "Yeah, you told the truth," I told him. "I'm proud of you." We kept talking and he sounded emotional. It was clear to me that he had not planned to say what he said, but he was not sorry. he had said it. When I think about it, it would have been it would have surprised me if Kanye had not said whatever he was feeling at that telethon. He is not someone you can just hand a script to and expect him to follow it verbatim, unless it expresses how he truly feels. The more important the issue, the more passionate he will be about it. What was more important than what went on that ill-fated day in New Orleans? Kanye is a thinker and a doer. That's how he's wired. How could he be expected to think any differently than he did that day? And being who he is, it's natural that his thoughts would be followed by the statement he made. I can't imagine him not calling it like he sees it. Isn't that what we should all do? It comes natural to him. His father was that way. Ray was very active in the movement, as was I. So we raised Kanye with a certain sensibility. That sensibility runs through the entire family. That consciousness that comes from knowing who you are and believing you have rights that should not and must not be violated. I've fought for justice all my life, or at least since almost as far back as I can remember. When I was just 6 years old, I was arrested for a sit in at a segregated restaurant in Oklahoma City. I remember crying, my little legs dangling over the seats of that big chair at the police station. I wasn't crying because I'd been arrested, though. I was crying because I wanted to ride to jail in the paddy wagon, just like my older brother Porty and the other big kids. But I was only 6 and too young for the paddy wagon. I guess I was also too young to be fingerprinted and put in a cell like my brother and the other kids. But that didn't stop me from wanting to be. We were all members of the NAACP Youth Council. Mrs. Clara Looper, who presided over the Youth Council, had organized us. We knew we were fighting nonviolently with a purpose, and we knew what the purpose was. I sat in that big chair and waited for my parents to come for my brother and me. And I wasn't scared, not at all. I was mad. That was in the mid 1950s. The movement hadn't made national headlines yet. There had not been the Montgomery bus boycott or the March on Washington. Emmett Till's brutalized and deformed remains had not yet appeared in Jet magazine. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't yet a household name, and the image of fire hoses and dogs had not yet gripped the American psyche. But in my hometown and places like it throughout America, coloreds, as we were called then, were fed up. The movement had begun, and I was part of it. It just had not been televised yet. I was arrested that day along with more than 20 others. We sat in at a hamburger place called Split Tea Restaurant and violated the injunction forbidding us to do so. So they took us to jail. That place is still standing today. I drove by it and wondered, why did we ever want to eat there? It's shabby looking now, but it wasn't then. It was just off limits to anyone black, as were almost all establishments in Oklahoma City and throughout America at the time. We kept sitting in, however. We were not deterred by a trip to jail, and within 2 years, almost every restaurant in the city was integrated because of our efforts. Integrating restaurants would not be Kanye's struggle, but the racism would be just as apparent in Louisiana in 2005 as it was in 1955. It would manifest itself in people left to die on rooftops. We know. We went to the Astrodome and talked with some of the people who were on the roofs. They told us how they'd been thrown body bags and told to put the bodies of their loved ones in the bags if they did not make it. We saw hundreds of them stretched out on cots, wondering where they'd go once the FEMA money ran out and the cot filled dome had closed. They listened as the president's mother said that some of them were better off than they had been before Hurricane Katrina hit. And we saw their anguished faces. Kanye had wanted to go to New Orleans to see the devastation firsthand. He was advised to go to Houston instead because by that time, dead bodies were floating around in contaminated waters in New Orleans, and supposedly all of the people who survived had been evacuated to other areas. He went to Houston. We were a delegation of 8. Ray and I joined Kanye. Senator Rodney Ellis and his assistant Karen Domino had worked it out so that Kanye could learn just what he wanted to know. What do the people need most? He asked. I can't do as much as I would like to, but I can do something. I want to talk to the victims myself and ask them what they need. I was touched by Kanye's sincerity and determination to help as much as he could. I was also impressed that he would not allow a single camera to follow us. I'm doing this as a regular citizen, not a celebrity, he said. He didn't want any credit or any publicity for any contribution he might make. He wanted to help quietly. We checked into our hotel and prepared for the next morning. We brought some toiletries and other personal items we'd been told would be useful to those we visited at two different churches in the area. Some of the gifts were not altogether practical, like lipstick and fingernail polishes for the ladies and cologne for the men. But I thought that with all the other gift boxes containing only basics, perhaps to beautify a little or put on a fragrance might not be all bad. The people loved those gifts, as well as the monetary contributions we made. For the children, we bought candy and Halloween masks. Wearing them seemed to be the most fun they'd had since the hurricane hit. Those were I love you gifts. We returned 2 weeks later with more substantive contributions. Our first full day in Houston, we started at the Astrodome. Before entering, we all joined hands and prayed. We wanted to be guided to say things and do things that would be most comforting, most meaningful. Our prayers were answered. And when many of the people saw Kanye, they were thrilled. They were glad that he had said what he had about the president, and they thanked him for it. Kanye was prepared to speak to the 2,000 people there over the PA system. We'd been told that he'd be able to, and we looked forward to it. That way, he could say something that would be inspiring, hopefully, to all there. As Kanye started toward the mic to greet the people, however, he was told that he could not. The Red Cross was in charge, and I guess they'd heard enough of Kanye for a while. It was too bad. I know it would have lifted the spirits of so many to know that Kanye was there and that he really cared. We visited the two churches on the itinerary that day, and Kanye was able to really talk to the people and ask individuals what they needed. Most responded that they needed jobs and a place to stay. Partnering with Urban League to interview families who'd been displaced, Kanye, through his foundation, was able to help. Thanks to his generosity, 15 families were given a furnished place to stay for 1 year. It was to be a transition year, a year to rebuild as much as possible. When Kanye said those words about the president, he spoke from his heart that day, and a nation of people heard him. He was talking about what was happening in New Orleans, but his words transcended that city and the president. The devastation, as tremendous as it was, is not nearly so tremendous as the poverty, ignorance, and hopelessness that characterize so many in this country. The attack, if you'd call it that, was not on the man George Bush, but on the government that he heads. I have never met George Bush, Kanye told me. Maybe one on one, he's a cool dude. But what's not cool is the overwhelming despair still rampant in this country. Were that not the case, there would have been far fewer people to side with Kanye. People were even printing t shirts with Kanye's words on them. The shirts sold out fast. Why? Because people wanted to echo the sentiments of Kanye West. They felt if George Bush cared about black people, the dropout rate among black males in this country would not be 58%. 33% of black males between the ages of 20 and 29 would not be incarcerated or under some correctional supervision. Unemployment for blacks would not be double that of whites in this country. 70+% of black babies would not be born out of wedlock or in orphanages. Almost 30% of all blacks would not be living at or under the poverty level. And the list goes on and on and on. Does this seem to you like a country where leaders care about black people? George Bush himself said that perhaps he needed to do a better job showing that he cares about black people. How can you claim that you care about something if you don't show it? You can say you care about your children, but if you don't provide for them, do you really care about them? You can say you care about your neighbor, but if you never even speak except in passing or when you want something, do you really care about them? You can say you care about your spouse, but if you beat him or her day and night, do you really care? The proof is in the doing. All the rest is just window dressing, just tinsel on a tree. In the midst of the craziness around Kanye making that statement, a strange calm came over me. The calm that comes after the storm. The calm that comes in knowing that truth is liberating. Kanye told a simple truth, one that Stevie Wonder could see. And it was news for weeks around the nation and the world. If the statement were not true, why all of the fervor? It's like somebody calling your mama a hoe. If she's not a hoe, you know she's not, and you don't even play into it. But if she is one, you want to fight. Fight, I will. But one thing I don't want to do is fear. We do too much of that as Black mothers. We're afraid for our children, especially our male children. That has been part of our legacy. We've taught our children to look down for so long, I'm not sure we know how to teach them to look up. We don't want them to expect too much because we fear they'll be disappointed if they don't get it. I couldn't do that with my child and expect him to grow from a boy to a man. When fear would dare raise its ugly head, I'd push it back down or shake it off and keep moving. There was no time for looking down or for tiptoeing around the truth. Not then and not now. We must teach our children to speak their minds and speak their truth with confidence and strength. Kanye stood strong when those words came through him. And today, he has not been the worse off for it. It's actually expanded his popularity enormously. And my respect for him, already as high as I thought it could be, shot through the roof. So many people come to rally behind him, which was undoubtedly confirming and comforting. Even an ex boyfriend of mine called to tell me he was not going to drink Pepsi. Pepsi was one of Kanye's endorsements at the time, and the rumor was that Pepsi was going to pull their endorsement deal. People everywhere started boycotting Pepsi. We got email and letters in support of Kanye over what they heard. We returned those email messages and phone calls when we could. Thankfully, Pepsi never pulled out of the deal or even thought about it. We wanted all our caring supporters to know that. Instead of ending the relationship, Pepsi actually beefed up play of Kanye's commercial on the stations throughout the country, particularly on MTV and BET. Any wonder why they chose those stations? People who didn't know who he was suddenly wanted to shake Kanye's hand and say thank you. Letters and calls came from people saying, "We got your back." From Al Branch, who's on Kanye's marketing team, to Al Gore, the former vice president of the United States. Kanye was approached and supported for his so called brave statement. I don't deny that it was a brave thing to do, but it was also the only thing to do. Like Gitlow says in Ozzie Davis's Pearly Victorious, one of my favorite plays, somebody's got to take a stand for the everlasting glory of our people, make civil rights from civil wrongs, and bring this old nation to a fair and just conclusion. Kanye took that stand at the telethon by simply telling the truth. While the truth can set you free, apparently it could also make you act crazy. Would you believe that on the flip side of the coin, some people who had donated to the Red Cross reportedly called and said they wanted their money back? If in fact that was the case, it saddens and disappoints me greatly that people would withdraw their support for human beings and pull back contributions made to lessen human suffering based on something someone said off script at a live telethon, something neither sanctioned nor supported by the Red Cross, is mind boggling to me. What else can one think but that they too didn't care about Black people, about poor people, about people in utter despair? After the fact, Kanye went on a couple of talk shows and was asked about his now infamous comment. On the Ellen DeGeneres show, Kanye shared his feelings about the possibility of losing existing or potential endorsements. He stated forthrightly, I might lose my endorsements for what I said, but what about the people who lost their families? What about the people who lost their lives? That's who he was speaking for that day, the people. They were the source of his pain. Seeing those bodies floating in the water, seeing the abandonment, seeing the lack of food, lack of water, and all too little help, reading about people being shot, seeing how blacks were portrayed as criminals, it was too much. Heard him say, George Bush doesn't care about black people. Heard him tell the truth.